Dim boom, quite, boom. Ai hở tai headphone. Bẹ hè đi. You mother.
Are you ready for the jury? Yes. Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Dr. Hughes, if you can come back to the stand for me, please. All right, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Hughes. I'm Wayne Dennis, and we haven't met before.
No, good morning.
Good morning. You testified yesterday that you have to give careful attention to gendered stereotypes. correct?
That is correct.
When you're talking about intimate partner violence, you have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes. And during your testimony, you in fact paid attention to gendered stereotypes, correct?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, you said we were going to have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes, and then you testified at length where you referenced both men and women. You paid attention to those stereotypes during the course of your testimony, correct?
What I was saying was you have to pay attention to gendered stereotypes when you're conducting these evaluations. You can't assume all the time that the male is the perpetrator and the female is the victim. You have to go into the evaluation understanding that the male also could be the victim of intimate partner violence.
In fact, you're aware that there are large-scale studies that do say that IPV towards males does exist.
Of course.
Okay. And every time you referred to the characteristic of a victim of intimate partner violence yesterday, you used the pronouns she or her, didn't you?
I was using the she and her pronouns in this case because my determination was, as I stated, that Ms. Hurd was the victim of intimate partner violence. That is why I was using the she, her pronouns.
You, in fact, said women get into the relationship for all the right reasons. That's what you said. Woman gets into the relationship for all the right reasons. Then you say difficult for victim to extricate herself. You go on to say that she can and she should. Over and over, you use she, right?
I believe in this case I did because I was referencing this case where I found Ms. Hurd to be the victim of intimate partner violence. It doesn't mean that men don't get into the relationships for all the right reasons too. I believe they do.
Nearly every time you referenced the perpetrator of IPV, you used he or him, didn't you?
And it goes back to the same reasoning as I'm describing my understanding and my evaluation in this matter. Of course, men can be perpetrators and victims of intimate partner violence. That's well established in the research, and that's well established in my clinical practice as well.
Isn't the reason that you used the pronouns that you did that you almost always testify on behalf of a woman?
That's not correct.
You don't even remember the last time you testified on behalf of a man.
Well, I don't testify on behalf of someone. I testify as to the results of my evaluation. I frequently treat and assess male victims of childhood sexual abuse who are coming into treatment for abuse by their Boy Scout leader, by their coach, by their teacher, by a trusted adult. I see them in therapy. I see them in forensic matters, in criminal cases. So
So
I
I
treat
didn't ask
and
you about
evaluate
treatment.
men
I-
all the time.
I didn't ask you about treatment. I asked you about testimony. You broke out your practice between treatment and testimony. I'm not asking you about treatment. When's the last time you testified on behalf of a man?
I testified recently in a deposition on behalf of a man who was traumatized because he was wrongly convicted.
At the time of your deposition 6 weeks ago, you couldn't remember a single time you had testified on behalf of a man.
I testified in my deposition that I testified in a case of a man who was wrongly convicted about 20 years and suffered physical and sexual violence in prison, and I detailed the traumatic effects of that happened on that gentleman.
All right, why don't we take a look at that?
Sure.
All right, thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Transcript of the deposition that you gave March 28th, 2022, correct?
Yes.
All right. Let's go to page 77. Let's look at page 70, line 8. So you can't recall a single instance where you were hired by the attorney representing the male in an IPV matter, correct?
In an IPV matter, not in a trauma matter or a child sexual abuse matter.
Okay, so that's the distinction. You don't have any recollection of ever testifying on behalf of a male in an IPV matter.
As I stated yesterday, the very first case that I testified in was in a same-sex intimate partner violence where the man was the victim of another man. I routinely treat and assess same-sex couples where then the female can be the perpetrator of another female, and the male can be the perpetrator or a victim of his partner.
So, let me get this. You testified in a case where one male is alleged to have engaged in IPV against another male.
Correct.
Okay. But that's the only one you remember. That's the only one you remember.
No, I've done this frequently. As you well know, most cases don't go to trial. I've worked on hundreds and hundreds of cases. You've limited it to testimony. Many cases don't come to trial, but I've issued reports and worked on many cases of same-sex intimate partner violence where men are the victims.
But I did ask you about testimony, and I limited the question to testimony, and the only testimony that you remember is the same-sex couple, right?
There were multiple same-sex couples, I believe, that I testified
That you
in.
testified in court at trial.
I believe so, yes.
All right, but you didn't remember that in March.
I did remember that in March.
Okay. You're a professional witness, correct?
That's not correct.
No? You make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year testifying in court, correct?
Not testifying in court. Cases never show up in the courtroom. And half of my practice and half of my income is about my clinical work with people who are coming to me for therapy.
I didn't ask you about the other half of your income. I'm asking you whether you made hundreds of thousands of dollars a year testifying as an expert witness in court.
As you're phrasing that question, that's not correct. That would be the amount of income that I generate from my forensic practice. I testify perhaps maybe once or twice a year. Most of the work is done behind the scenes in evaluating individuals and issuing reports.
But you'll agree with me that a big part of that practice is providing expert witness testimony.
That's not correct.
No? That's not a big part of your practice.
If I testify twice a year, that's not a big part of my practice. All the other time is doing the work for the cases and evaluating the individuals and issuing reports.
All right. What percentage of work do you devote to forensic psychology?
As I stated yesterday, I say half and half clinical, half forensic, but I also have a substantial amount of time that I use in the professional activities and serving on professional boards.
So what portion of your practice do you provide expert witness services?
I think you're using the expert witness services synonymous with the forensic psychology part of the practice. So the forensic psychology practice, what I do here today is one part of it, and it's a smaller part as opposed to all of the evaluations and individuals that I'm assessing.
Your practice is successful enough that you maintain your offices on Madison Avenue in New York, correctly?
Correct. I've had that office since 2005.
Right. And you're sufficiently successful at your forensic work that you're able to perform unpaid work at a hospital, correct?
Correct, and I also do pro bono work as well.
There. In fact, you actually instruct others on the use of expert testimony in court cases, correct?
On the use and understanding trauma and violence abuse in the courtroom and how to, for advocates and people who could not have this level of training or experience, how to come into the courtroom and talk about very difficult issues of domestic violence, yes.
All right. Can we pull up PX 1241? Do you recognize that document?
Yes, it looks like the front page of a PowerPoint presentation
And it's a PowerPoint presentation given by whom?
by myself and Mary Ann Dutton, who is a very well-known and respected researcher and clinician in the area of domestic violence.
And what's the topic of the PowerPoint that you're giving?
Expert witness testimony in cases involving domestic violence.
Okay. And who did you give this presentation to?
That was to the National Clearinghouse for the Defense of Battered Women. That is an organization that provides legal services to women who have assaulted or killed their partners in self-defense, and mostly people who, these individuals, the women who they've seen in treatment are through shelter-based programs or through advocates, and those are individuals who don't really know how to come into the courtroom and talk, and that's what this presentation and training was for.
I'm going to move PX 1241 into evidence.
Any objection? All right, 1241 in evidence. Do you want it published? Or?
Yes, let's publish it to the jury. All right. Why don't we pull up PX 1242? Do you recognize this document?
Yes, this also looks like a PowerPoint presentation that I gave.
All right. And what is the name of this PowerPoint presentation?
This is called The Use of Psychological Experts in Cases of Domestic Violence. It was presented to the Kings County Bar Association, which is in Brooklyn. And what this presentation talked about was some of the things that I talked to you all about yesterday, the myths and misconceptions in intimate partner violence, when women use force, what happens if they drop protective orders, how they present in court, and that's what this presentation was to attorneys at the Bar Association.
Okay. But this is another presentation that you gave as to the use of psychological experts. You gave it to a bar association.
Right, they were prosecutors and defense attorneys in attendance at that Bar Association.
At your deposition, you testified that you were going to be paid $100 an hour for your time in this case.
I did not testify to that.
You did not?
That's an error in the transcript.
Oh, that's not right.
That's correct.
So, and you corrected the transcript?
We did not do an errata in the transcript at this point.
So you knew there was an error in the transcript, but you didn't fix it,
There were several errors in the transcript.
but you didn't fix any of it.
There was no time to fix them, that's correct.
All right. So you're not being paid $100 an hour. How much are you getting paid?
I'm being paid $500 an hour.
$500 an hour. And that's what, and that's the bill you sent for your deposition, right? $500 an hour.
Correct.
You submitted a number of disclosures in this case. You have not formed an opinion as to whether Mr. Depp committed intimate partner violence against Ms. Heard, correct?
Correct. I formed the opinion that Ms. Heard's report of the intimate partner violence is consistent with what we know in the literature about intimate partner violence.
You have a limited role here comparing individual data to group data and then just determining whether it's consistent, right?
I wouldn't say it's a limited role, but that's generally correct.
You wouldn't use the word limited role?
A limited role in terms of how we go about a forensic evaluation,
Do you
not
know
a
whether-
limited role in this case.
Do you remember whether you used limited role in your deposition?
I don't. If you have it in front of me, you probably think I did, but sure.
And you have no independent knowledge of the facts underlying the alleged abuse, correct?
I have the knowledge of the plethora of documents that I've reviewed in this case.
No, I'm asking you your independent firsthand knowledge. You have none of that, right?
You mean whether I was there?
Yeah, you weren't there.
Of course not.
Okay. And you're not testifying to the veracity, the truthfulness of any of the allegations.
Correct. I'm testifying to the consistency of the data points of all the different documents, including the psychological testing and the clinical evaluation that I conducted of Ms. Heard, and how that comports with the therapy records and all the other documents and the photos and texts that I reviewed.
And you have no personal knowledge of any abuse.
Correct, personally. Correct.
Right. And all you know is what Ms. Heard self-reported to you and others.
That's not correct.
Because you did collateral interviews?
And I reviewed medical records, and I reviewed other witness statements of what they witnessed and what they saw.
And all of those statements that you reviewed, those were statements that started with Ms. Heard, correct?
Not necessarily.
Well, the medical records did, didn't they?
Well, the medical records, if she's self-reporting what happened to her, sure.
Everything Ms. Heard reported directly to you was after she was sued by Mr. Depp in this case, correct?
Correct.
And you didn't meet Ms. Heard until, what, September 2019?
That was the first evaluation appointment, correct.
How'd you get engaged?
Engaged?
How'd you get hired to
Oh.
do this work?
I was contacted by the legal team.
Or were you interviewed by her legal team as to whether you were going to testify here?
I was not.
You were not interviewed.
I was not.
You were contacted.
Correct.
Had you worked with that legal team before?
I had.
Yeah. So they already knew who you were, right?
Correct.
Right. And at any time that you were working with Ms. Heard or assessing Ms. Heard, she could have chose to fire you, correct?
I suppose her legal team could have chose to fire her. I was not her. She is not my client. The legal team is the one who hires me. I am responsible to the legal team, not Ms. Heard.
And the legal team that hired you already knew who you were because you worked together previously.
And clearly they knew of my expertise in this area of intimate partner violence and traumatic stress, which is why they contacted me to work on this matter.
All right. Several times yesterday you used language about assessing Ms. Heard's relationship with Mr. Depp. Remember talking about that?
Sure.
You can't assess a relationship without talking to both parties, can you?
You certainly can get a lot of information from one party, absolutely.
But
And
you're gonna-
especially when it's buttressed by other documents, including 4 years of therapy records and couples therapy records, you can get a lot of information based on those documents and that contemporaneous reports of the relationship.
Respectfully, I didn't ask whether you get a lot of information. I asked whether you can assess a relationship without talking to both parties.
I believe you can. There are certainly limitations inherent in that. but you
Boo.
certainly can.
Boo.
You talked to Miss Heard
Pay-
for, what, approximately
actor.
30 hours, right?
Correct.
You are
How
done.
long you spent with
You are
Mr.
done.
Depp?
I did not spend any time with Mr. Depp. It was my understanding that he did not sit for a psychological evaluation.
Right. In fact, you never met Mr. Depp, have you?
I have not.
But you purport to be able to assess the relationship between Mr. Depp and Miss Heard?
But I also read Mr. Depp's transcripts of his testimony. I watched his deposition testimony. I reviewed his medical records. I reviewed his text messages. So it's not necessarily totally blind. I did have information, although I'm not making a conclusion about Mr. Depp himself.
Is the standard now not necessarily totally blind?
I'm not
That's how
sure.
you assess the relationship? If it's not necessarily totally blind, I can assess it?
No, we assess as clinical psychologists relationships all the time. That's what we're trained to do.
Wow.
Certainly someone who's been trained in
猪脸了
violence
Amber Heard 的
to
猪脸
understand and look for the dynamics that happen in that relationship. And then when we have external data that supports what the individual is telling us, way before this legal case even came on the scene, that becomes very strong data to support that conclusion.
Let's talk about some of that data,
Sure.
all right? You chose to conduct some collateral interviews,
Correct.
right? And you interviewed Dr. Bonnie Jacobs.
Correct.
And you looked at her notes,
Correct.
and you know that Miss Jacobs, Dr. Jacobs, doesn't know anything about the version of what happened in Australia until Miss Heard had already been sued, correct?
I believe she was not in treatment with Dr. Jacobs at the time the Australia incident occurred, so that would be correct. She did reach out to Dr. Connell Cohen about Australia, who she was treating with at that time contemporaneously.
I'll ask you about Dr. Cohen. We'll get there. So, you know that Miss Heard stopped seeing Dr. Jacobs in August 2014.
That's correct.
And she didn't go back until after she got sued, right?
I believe that's the date. I'd have to look to make sure, but I believe that you're correct.
And you said you reviewed you interviewed Dr. Connell Cohen.
That's correct.
And you also reviewed his deposition testimony.
That's correct.
And you know that that he testified that when he was treating a patient, he assumes the patient is telling the truth, correct?
I believe he said something to that effect in his deposition.
And
If he has
wasn't-
no reason to believe otherwise, if there's no other data to believe otherwise, that your patient's not being totally honest with you, then you believe what they're saying.
Right. No other data to believe otherwise, but the sole thing that's happening is Miss Heard is talking to Mr. Cohen, or Dr. Cohen.
I wouldn't say she's talking to him, she's going to him for therapy, and he's using his clinical psychological expertise to understand the connection between her symptoms and what she's reporting, what's going on in her life.
All right. But you understand that he testified that he assumes the patient is telling the truth.
Again, I understand that statement in his testimony. I have a lot more rich information of having spoken to him for 2 hours and reviewing his clinical notes.
He testified he was making a leap of faith with respect to that, right? With respect to the truthfulness.
Again, that was not my understanding of speaking with him and reviewing his notes. I'm aware he testified something to that effect.
And you testified yesterday that Dr. Cohen never diagnosed Ms. Heard with any personality disorders. You remember that?
Yes.
In fact, Dr. Cohen's deposition testimony reflects the fact that he doesn't make diagnoses, correct?
Correct, and I asked him specifically, did he have any indications that even if he doesn't, as his practice, use them does she meet criteria for a personality disorder? And he told me she did not.
All right, so you asked him specifically with respect to a topic that you haven't disclosed in your expert report, and then he made a conclusion that's reflected in no document.
It's reflected in my notes. It's reflected in his notes about what he's treating. He's treating the symptoms. He's not focusing on the diagnosis, but he is treating the symptoms.
And you talked about Dr. Cohen's concern for Ms. Heard's safety.
Correct.
He wasn't talking about her physical safety, was he?
Yes, he was.
No, he was talking about her emotional safety. Wasn't that what he was talking about?
He was concerned for both.
Okay. Did Dr. Cohen testify that he never had the feeling that Johnny intended to hurt Ms. Heard?
I believe he said that. I mean, he talked about Mr. Depp being very poorly controlled, and that's what made him, Dr. Cohen, concerned, because in those moments when he was not controlled, that he could accidentally seriously hurt Ms. Heard.
Let's do this again. Ms. Heard told Dr. Cohen that Mr. Depp was poorly controlled, correct?
That's not correct.
Okay. He determined that from the treatment he was providing Ms. Heard.
And he also had a couple session with Mr. Depp, and he also had correspondence with Dr. Kipper. So he had other information as to Mr. Depp's functioning.
All right, you talked about Dr. Banks.
Correct.
Dr. Banks was doing relationship consulting, right? Consultation and relationship.
Correct.
And Dr. Banks only met with them once.
Correct.
All right. And you did an interview, I think, with Ms. Heard's mother, Paige.
That's correct.
All right. You'd agree with me that a person's family member is not the most objective source of information?
Sometimes you have to certainly control for that the person may be wanting to be protective of their daughter, of course.
And you interviewed Ms. Paige Heard after Mr. Depp had already sued Amber Heard.
Right. The entirety of my work in this case happened, obviously, after the lawsuit.
Did you review, in that context, any of Paige Heard's text messages with Mr. Depp?
I'm not sure if I saw them with Mr. Depp. I do believe I saw some with Miss Heard. I mean, Miss Paige Heard, Amber Heard's mother, did talk to me about her relationship with Mr. Depp.
And she told you that she loved Johnny even after Amber alleged abuse, correct?
She did.
All right. Now, you testified that you approach a forensic evaluation with, I think you said it again today, a healthy degree of skepticism.
Correct.
All right. This skepticism didn't cause you to conduct interviews with, for instance, Laurel Anderson.
Right, I did not speak to Dr. Laurel Anderson.
And you chose not to speak to Dr. Laurel Anderson because you disagreed with Dr. Laurel Anderson?
That's not correct.
All right. What did Dr. Laurel Anderson do on behalf of Ms. Heard and Mr. Depp?
She was a couples therapist that they sought. They had 4 couples sessions. As I stated yesterday, one of them in which Mr. Depp stormed out of. She did have a long, I guess, evaluation or interview with Mr. Depp individually and with Ms. Heard individually. And then she saw them intermittently after the May 21st, 2016 incident, and when they were filing for divorce.
So you didn't interview Laurel Anderson, but you know what she did? How'd you figure that out?
Because we had her redacted notes and her deposition.
All right. And you understood from her deposition that Dr. Anderson didn't believe Ms. Heard to be a victim of spousal abuse?
I believe those were her words, yes.
And you also understood from her deposition that Mr. Depp had not had a very long history of being violent with any of his wife or women.
That she said that as well.
Yeah.
but that's something about Ms. Heard significantly triggered him. She talked about that as well.
And Dr. Anderson thought that Mr. Depp had been, her words, well controlled, I think for almost 20 or 30 years, correct?
Up until this point, I believe she said.
I know that you testified that you reviewed medical records.
Yes,
All right. So, you know Miss Heard had a personal nurse,
correct,
Erin Filati.
correct.
You didn't interview Miss Filati either.
I did not.
You know she spent time with Miss Heard on a regular basis during her relationship with Mr. Depp.
Correct, I had her clinical notes that I reviewed.
Right. And you reviewed her deposition testimony,
Correct,
some of which the jury's heard, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. And you reviewed the nursing notes.
Yes,
So you know that Ms. Heard admitted to a history of eating disorders to Ms. Filati, correct?
I know that's in the notes. That's nowhere else in any other record, so I'm not sure where that came from.
But you relied on everybody else's notes.
And there are some things that I disagreed with, like I disagree with Dr. Laurel Anderson about it being mutual abuse.
Right. So the stuff you disagree with, you disregard, and the rest you keep, correct?
That's not correct.
But that's what you did.
That's not correct.
All right. You know that Ms. Filati saw Ms. Heard immediately after she returned from Australia.
I'd have to look at the notes again to be sure, but I know she did see her when she came back from Australia. That's correct.
Did Ms. Filati document any injuries to Ms. Heard in her notes?
I did not see that in the record.
Okay, so you looked at her notes, and there's no injury to Ms. Heard documented in her nurse's notes following her return from Australia.
Correct.
Okay. You talked about this concept, which you then defined, lethality. And you testified there are certain factors of their present relationship where a woman ends up murdered by her partner.
Correct.
And that's one of the ways you look as to whether a woman is in a very dangerous situation.
Correct.
Can we pull up PX 92? So it
It's
has
an
to be
evidence.
published to the jury.
Yeah, it will be published.
Do you know what this is?
I believe this is the knife that Miss Heard gave to Mr. Depp as a gift.
All right. And you speak Spanish?
Un poquito?
Do you know what it says?
Yes, it says hasta la muerta, till death.
So a woman you suggest has characteristics of being afraid for her life, gives her intimate partner a large knife, which she has inscribed until death. That's your testimony?
Well, there's context.
Okay. We can do that later. So we talked about, you talked a little bit about Mr. Depp purporting to demonstrate jealousy with Ms. Heard. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And you specifically talked about Mr. Depp displaying jealousy regarding the actor James Franco.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, the very first time you met with Ms. Heard, she talked to you about Ms. Franco, Mr. Franco, James Franco, correct?
I don't know if it was the first time, but I did ask about some other relationships.
Okay, so why don't we do this? Let's go PX 1246. I just want to go to the first page. All right. So, do you recognize the document that's in front of you?
Yes.
All right. And what I would like to do, what is it?
It's a top sheet of a background information questionnaire that I use to help guide the evaluation.
Okay. So, now, this is, who filled it out?
I filled it out,
Whose form is it?
my form.
All right. I'm going to move just the first page into evidence because we're going to talk about other portions of it later.
Could you back us so she can see the whole first page? Any objection? Okay, I can't.
We will admit the whole thing in evidence.
You want the whole thing in evidence?
Sure.
No objection whatsoever.
All right, 1246 in evidence in full. Okay. Are there any identifiers that need, or we're just going?
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some.
All right.
Probably.
Okay, so you owe me a redacted one, correct?
Don't know what the nature of the redactions are going to be, but
Okay, well, you
Yeah.
can discuss it.
We'll work with
Okay,
you on that,
thank you.
but I'm
All right.
positive there's identifiers in there.
all right. 1246 has been moved into evidence. Can we blow up the bottom right-hand corner?
All right, you want to publish to the jury?
Yeah, let's publish it to the jury. I don't,
Well, we can, well, why don't you,
I don't see anything on the first
if
page.
you want to look at that, any objection to that? Well, that's what they're going to show.
That's what we're going to show.
All right, publish then.
All right. All right. So this is the bottom corner, your notes. And it's under the section of your notes that's entitled Intimate Relationships.
Correct.
Right. And one of the notes here on the right, it says JF, that's James Franco, right?
Correct.
Got close but really wanted to be with Johnny.
Well, it says JF friends. They were friends.
All right. Said friends, but you put him under intimate relationship.
Well, there's a line there because I was asking specifically about other things that were allegations in this matter.
There's a line there because you did not believe that they should go under intimate relationships, but it's on your form?
She wasn't telling me that this was an intimate relationship. I queried as to what's going on with James Franco because that was something that was raised in this case.
And there's a note for December 2015.
When they became more friends, more friendly.
Right. And that was a period of time in which Ms. Heard was married to Mr. Depp, correct?
Correct.
So she became close with Mr. Franco in December 2015, and at least you put it under intimate relationships.
With a line differentiating another part of this document.
Okay. Did you provide another header, like a header that says friends?
No.
No. Well, let's look at the next one. The next one says, I think it says Elon.
Correct.
It's Elon Musk, right?
Correct.
All right. May 2016.
Correct.
Met him at Met Ball.
Correct.
That's a big fancy party in New York, right?
Yes, it is.
All right. And she said she dated him after John.
Correct.
She met Elon Musk in May 2016 when she filed a TRO.
The last answer was May 21st. I believe it was May 26th, 27th. I'm correct.
When did she start dating Elon Musk?
Sometime after that.
All right. Sometime after the TRO?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. You talk, we can take that down. You talked quite a lot yesterday about this concept of reactive violence.
Yes.
Yeah. Just so I understand your position on this, is it your position that if Miss Heard was abused, she gets to hit Mr. Depp?
That's not my opinion.
But you know she hits him, right?
And I testified to that.
Right. And how many times do you believe that she told you that she hit him?
Do I believe that she told me, or how many instances were there?
Well, I don't know, how would you know other than her telling you? You weren't there, right?
I was not there, that's correct.
All right. How many times did she admit to hitting you?
She indicated a number of times in a number of instances.
You indicated that you had listened to audio recordings as part of the work you did in this case?
That's correct.
All right. I'd like to play you a portion of one of those recordings. It's Plaintiff's Exhibit 343. It's already in evidence. And for the record, the portion I want to play is 2 minutes 46, 246.01 to 247.20.
I said to Travis, I said to you, hey, tell Travis what just happened.
Oh, you told me to do it. You told me to. You said, go do that.
I said, no, tell him what just happened.
And I lied.
And that you punched me in
You're
the
right.
fucking thing. And
You figured it out.
And you said, no, fuck it, I didn't. What the fuck are you talking about? And I watched you lie. And then
I didn't punch you, by the way. I'm sorry that I didn't hit you across the face in a proper slap, but I was hitting you. It was not punching you. Babe, you're not punched.
Don't tell me what it feels like to be punched.
You know, you've been a lot of fights, been around a long time. I know. Yeah.
No, when you fucking have a close
You didn't get punched. You got hit. I'm sorry I hit you like this, but I did not punch you. I did not fucking deck you. I fucking was hitting you. I don't know what the motion of my actual hand was, but you're fine. I did not hurt you. I did not punch you. I was hitting you.
How are you?
What am I supposed to do? Do this? I'm not sitting here bitching about it, am I? You are. That's the difference between me and you. You're a fucking baby.
Because you started.
You are such a baby. Grow the fuck up, Johnny.
Physical fights?
I did start a physical
Yeah,
fight.
you did, so I had
Because-
to get the fuck out of there.
Yes, you did. So you did the right thing, the big thing. You know what? You are admirable.
You agree with Ms. Hurd that it's admirable to retreat from a fight?
Is it admirable? It is admirable to retreat from a fight.
Yeah. Anything about this tape suggest to you that it's characteristic of reactive violence?
In this instance, if true, if she said she hit him first, then that would not be reactive violence.
All right. You testify